joining us on today's webinar. I'm Alex and I head up People and Culture for Employment Hero. And today we are going to talk about how to create an excellent remote candidate experience. It really is something that a lot of us have struggled with, and I think we will continue to find our feet as we are a little bit novices at remote work. We were thrown into the COVID disaster, and then we thought we were coming back, and unfortunately Victoria had the unfortune of having a second wave. And so we're now really dealing with how long is this going to keep going for, and how do we make that remote candidate experience as good as it can be. And today I'm thrilled to be joined by Zubin Fitter from Curious Thing. Hi Zubin, how are you?
Hi Alex, very good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Could you tell us a little bit about Curious Thing and your role at Curious Thing?
Absolutely. So I head up sales and partnerships at Curious Thing with the commercial team. And essentially who we are is we have developed a conversational AI. We're a startup, we're 2 years old, we're based in Sydney. We developed a conversational AI that automates phone interviews within the recruitment process. But essentially what we do is we deliver that. Our delivery model is extremely unique. So we use voice as an AI interviewer rather than any other mechanism. And the way we're doing that is the technology that we have developed actually lets the AI actively listen to the candidate. So it's like having a natural discussion with the candidate, but then it also jumps in and it's asking follow-up questions. So we're quite unique. There's no other product like this in the marketplace right now.
Fantastic use of technology, and I'm sure an absolute game changer for recruiters out there and those screening hundreds and hundreds of resumes. So Zubin, it's no surprise that COVID-19 has changed the way we work forever. What do you think have been the biggest changes within recruitment?
I think one of the biggest change that has kind of evolved is the explosion of applications that people have actually gone to market with. So any open role you take in the marketplace right now, there's probably 200 times or 200% more applications that do come through. And what that has seen in some cases where recruitment teams have kind of been on the back foot, and being on the back foot, they have probably have had to react a bit more rather than be more strategic in terms of implementing a remote solution. So in some cases, going remote could be we're just doing Skype calls, for example, but I think that is not truly leveraging the technology that is currently out there. I think a second shift that we have also seen is businesses have been also forced to work remotely. So we're a small business. We've got 14 employees. We're all working remotely. So what does that mean for a particular organization in terms of, how we're working together? We're more productive. The commute times have dropped. There's a bit more balance in terms of work life. That's if you're not in lockdown. But I think all in all, there is a new way of doing things. And I think that pattern is here to stay, as opposed to, somebody's going to turn the switch off and we'll all be back in the city.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, and we've certainly ourselves seen a spike in applications that are coming through. So, my team are very diligent in going through every single resume, and I know that it's certainly put a lot of pressure on them in their jobs as we've started to hire again. So off the back of that, Ruben, do you think these changes are permanent?
I think more than permanent, they're just likely to stay. So we've forged a new way of working. We have all kind of worked out, if we look in March, we thought, this is going to be a bit temporary. Then came the concept of reset. Well, it's never a reset because reset means going back to the old ways. But I think what we have now done is we've forged a new way of working. And what that means, what that essentially means is, we need the job done. Regardless of where you are, as long as you have the tools and as long as you have an organization that helps you kind of support that, the job can be done. So we're all getting used to, doing Zoom calls, and literally the whole week kind of just zooms past as far as anything goes in terms of meetings, and the productivity goes up. So the lines do get blurred a bit in terms of home versus work. But I think driving that balance and working on solutions that are, enhancing that for your staff are probably something that are really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think in terms of remote work and flexible work, COVID, the one good thing that's come out of it is that it's done the change management for us. So we've got a lot of managers out there who may have been really skeptical about trusting employees to work remotely or work flexibly prior to COVID happening. And, most businesses have proved out there that working from home is possible, and giving people flexibility certainly gets a lot of commitment in return.
Mm-hmm.
So, Ruben, what do you think are the biggest challenges of hiring remotely?
I think the way if I go back to the previous world, the way we've been interacting is people to people. And I think still creating that engagement with your candidates is probably a really, really important piece that should never be brushed under the carpet only because we're all doing things electronically. I think what candidates with displaced people out of their work, the volume of applications have gone up. And what that means is when candidates do apply, they do expect the organization to still maintain and uplift that engagement that happens from an applicant perspective. Why should the candidate experience be different for a brand X from a brand Y just because there's more applications? I think that doesn't need to happen. And some of the biggest challenges are that, well, as part of some of the cuts that might have happened through organizations, some talent teams have also been kind of reduced in numbers. So what that means is the luxury that people would have in terms of, somebody doing a particular role within that team, that is missing at the moment. So how can great automation kind of still result in that candidate engagement piece that comes out? I think the second one also is doing culture onboarding. So you're working remotely, you're interviewing remotely, like we've just gone through a bit of hiring ourselves, and we have successfully done a remote culturing hiring round as well. So, some of the principles that we kind of adopted in doing that, obviously that was over a video call, given the restrictions we do have in place. But the way that was done was quite different and also kept the candidate quite engaged in the entire process.
Yeah, and I know I've certainly found personally to get that engagement on Zoom when you are interviewing a candidate once they've been screened and they get through to that phase, it's taking that extra time to make sure the candidate understands the company and feels really comfortable. It's actually very personal, I think, when you get invited into a candidate's home, or I've been finding doing interviewing over Zoom, that it is really lovely and a great way to kind of kick off the conversation as to where someone might be sitting or how they're dealing with working from home. What have you found that's worked for you, Ruben, in terms of when you get to that in-person Zoom kind of first or second interview? How have you found engaging the candidate as well as trying to, I guess, showcase your culture? Because we no longer have an office where people are coming in to see your 14 great team members and really get a sense or feel for how Curious Thing is within a culture and as a workplace.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think most of the stuff is, I think, geared towards the person and really understanding, or getting a window into the inside of the person who you're doing the onboarding with. But I think the second important part also is that if we have multiple people on that particular call, a leadership team, for example, doing that particular call, it is also a preview not just into the individual, but the organization as well. And I think the individual part is really important. Like you say, getting that person out on that Zoom call and that personality out on the Zoom call, I think that is a quick rapport builder, if you want to call it for a lack of a better term, because, nobody now walks into the office, so we can't create that. The best I could do is replicate a Zoom background that looks like a particular office and show people this is where we used to work. But where you'll end up working is probably in your lounge room or your study or your office or whatever setup you have. But I think we also take particular care in terms of the tools that are required by a candidate to be successful. So everything that they kind of need to make sure that they're well equipped to kind of, start that particular journey. but it's not just starting the journey, but it's consistently checking in to ensure that that onboarding has gone the way it is supposed to, or if there are some other anomalies that have come out to that give us an opportunity to kind of address that. So once again, I mean, really staying close to the person rather than the role.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. So then moving on, what do you think are the biggest opportunities when it comes to remote hiring?
I think the biggest opportunity right now is for HR teams to make some quick decisions. And I think quick decisions in terms of not just what we have seen is like a 6 or a 7 part recruitment process condensed down to 3 or 4. And what healthy automation does right at the start has to go, and you have to demand it going more than just a vanity, which is it's not just a different way of doing a particular phone call or an interaction, but it's actually needs to add value to the reduced talent acquisition team that might be sitting at the other end. So I'll give you an example. A recruitment team cut down by probably 70%, but the hiring that happens within the organization, the demands are still there. Nobody said because the numbers have gone down, we're going to be less demanding in terms of hiring. So that puts immense pressure on somebody who is doing that initial screening. And because we operate within that phase, what we have noticed is, it's not just about a vehicle of doing that particular screening interview. So it's not just a video or a phone call or an automated phone call or a chat message. It is actually what value does that add to the individual sitting at the other end? So does it enable quick decision making? Does it provide great data on the candidate? If it does, then what is the story that tells that goes beyond that individual's resume that helps you make some quicker and more robust decisions moving forward? So I think we have seen that being some of the biggest opportunities that HR teams can actually kind of leverage on, because, through conversations over the years, talent teams have always gone, there is a better way of doing things. And guess what? Now is the time to do that.
Yeah, that's great. And Ruben, do you think candidates' needs and expectations have changed?
Absolutely. I think the candidates will always demand what they demand from a particular brand or an organization. Just because the world has gone remote doesn't mean you can literally kind of, deprioritize that particular piece. So example, once again, lots of applications go out. I think gone are the days where it takes 2 or 3 weeks for any talent team to get back to an applicant. There are some really quick fixes out there, including us, that actually engage the candidate right from the start in that talent process. And what that also means is that you also want to get to top talent really quickly. And the only way you could do that is if you're actually naturally progressing people through your hiring process.
Absolutely. And I think back to your point earlier, we've seen the candidate, cycle kind of shrink. And, it used to be 6 times, sometimes an interview, people coming in, having to make excuses to come into the office. And now we're able to streamline it and get more people on Zoom and make it a lot faster, which does make it a more competitive landscape out there. So if you're thinking about being competitive, make sure that you are thinking around how you can be streamlining, getting feedback and getting back to employees and candidates and keeping them in the loop as to where they're at within the process. So moving on, Ruben, what 3 trends do you think will be most important for the candidate experience over the next 12 months or so?
I think one of the most important ones is the experience has to be seamless and branded in terms of, it has to be an overall experience rather than different sections of a particular process. So the initial engagement that happens right from a job ad that goes out until the person gets hired is all about that engagement piece that happens with that particular brand. So the seamless branded experience, no matter what technology that a candidate is using for their particular job application, is really, really important, because that first impression, most often than not, ends up being the last impression. I think one of the other things also that candidates demand, which are really important, given the world is remote right now, any tools or any measures that they have that drives the reduction of that bias that comes in any conversation that happens with a candidate is really, really important. Just because I might be doing an interview and have a white wall behind me doesn't mean I'm vanilla. And it doesn't mean that, I'm not sure if this person is quite creative enough or great for this particular role. So we have tools and mechanisms in place that help people understand a lot more than, what just the candidate is saying. And I think those need to be leveraged. And I think the third most important one is unique ways to communicate the company's culture. So I think VR, for example, there is a huge spike in terms of VR companies trying to create what working within that organization looks like. Like we see it through our email invitations and completion of interviews that happen where the candidates are actually being pointed to people and culture videos to really understand what it is like to working remotely within a particular organization so they know what they're in for.
Fantastic. Yeah, I've certainly found from personal experience as well, I think one trend that we all need to be mindful for while we're hiring is to allow more time for candidates to ask questions in remote hiring. And you need to allow that time because what they're wanting to ask about and understand is your culture and what it's like to work for the company. And virtual onboarding is a real challenge that we can certainly go into during Q&A. However, you need to really allow for that extra time on Zoom and make sure you're briefing your hiring managers to allow for that time for candidates to ask questions. And it really shows your interest in them if you're giving them that time and space to be asking questions, and real questions, not just about the job itself, questions about the team, about the workplace, how did things work before COVID, how are things working now, what's your communications cadence. You're going to be asked all of those kinds of questions. So just making sure you're slotting aside probably close to a quarter of the interview time, I've been finding, has been taken up by allowing candidates to ask questions and just having that patience to give them the right answers and engage with them, and always be mindful of that candidate experience. Even if the candidate isn't successful this time, you might want to bring them back for an interview for another role in the future, and you always want them to walk away as a brand advocate. So giving them that time, while sometimes if you've already decided they're not right for the role, might seem obsolete in terms of your time as a hiring manager or someone in recruitment, it really does pay back to make sure you have that patience. So moving on, what advice do you have for everyone out there who is doing remote hiring and potentially having a few struggles or bumps in the road?
I think we always get caught up in the trap of I need a perfect solution as opposed to I need a solution that helps me lighten the load at the moment and sets me on that trajectory to automation. So I always say automate everything that you can and use data to make decisions. Because I think there's two parts to that particular phrase, and the first part being automate, and automate the things that are mundane. So I hear every single day going, my current screening process is I have to call 40 people in a day and I have to do the same interview. Well, automate that part, but still leave the decision-making to the human in terms of, and this is where the data comes in, where the data that is the outcome of the automation should support the human decision-making framework. So it's never about automate going, Alex is the right person for the job, but automate to the point where you want to consider Alex to dig a bit more before you start, having that conversation with Alex. So I think automate everything you can and use data. That's really, really important. And I think choose technology that you can see yourself scaling with. So don't just look at the quick fix, because what remote meant to us back in April is completely different from what it means right now in almost September. And it will be extremely different by the time it's January. And I think where everything is converging to is not just any solution, but an actual solution that could be automated that drives value in the decision-making process.
Absolutely. And it's a really good point you make around automation, as we see a really big spike in people applying for roles. Something that we've found really useful is either adding in a few screening questions around what sparked your interest in this ad, down to and including submit a 5-minute video. Anyone can record themselves these days on QuickTime on a Mac or a PC. They can also record themselves on their iPhone or their Android. And getting that 5-minute video can just give you a little bit of insight into whether that person might be a cultural and a personality add to your company, rather than just kind of being a piece of paper, as you say, as that volume spikes and takes up a lot more time.
Yeah.
So we'd love to throw it over to Q&A if people would like to throw questions into the Q&A channel. Or also feel free to unmic yourselves and ask questions live. Okay, so far we haven't had any questions. What I might do is just move on to, you mentioned, and certainly we've found some wins in terms of virtual onboarding. What are some of the things that you've found to be really good with bringing someone on and onboarding them remotely? Because it is a real challenge when you think through it, and you also think through starting a new job and not having that opportunity to be in the office and meet your team and meet people.
I think some of the quick things, especially from my perspective, are all around providing some sort of certainty to the candidate, where they see more than just, when is my next meeting with a particular individual, or what parts of the business am I getting exposure to. But also, I think also, like, we have a new candidate in the office at the moment. And basically what we have done is, while they're being thrown at the deep end, they're always encouraged to come up with as many questions as they can, because in asking those one-on-one questions as opposed to questions within channels is also getting to understand people and understand their different working relationships and what drives them versus what doesn't. I think those are some of the important pieces for us, where it's not just about work-related communications, but it's also about, something you don't know about a particular person you're already working on the team. So taking that time to do that. If you need to block out 30 minutes and have lunch over a Zoom just to have a social conversation, we'll do that.
Absolutely agree. And, we've done fun events like virtual trivia and virtual happy hour, where we use online tools such as Scriblo, which is an online Pictionary tool, and that's been really fun. And, making sure new hires join in to those drop-ins. They're meeting people outside their team within their first week, which is a really terrific thing. Yeah. So now we do have some questions come through. Elizabeth you mentioned the bias piece. Don't you think having a video can increase bias based on what people look like? I'll take that first. And Elizabeth, I would say no, provided that you have made sure any of your hiring managers are aware of their biases that they may have, and that the final decision is not only down to the hiring manager, that you do have someone such as a cultural champion who might be there to say, no, you're hiring a cookie cutter of every single other person in your team. We need diversity of thought, whether it's race, whether it's gender, whatever it might be, and just making sure that we as custodians of people and culture make sure that teams are diverse, and that hiring managers aren't kind of building teams of all of many themselves, because you just don't get the diversity of thought. I don't know if you have anything to add.
I think that's an important piece. And in terms of the video stuff, so just to kind of clarify again, Curious Thing is not a video interviewing platform. It's actually a digital phone interview solution. And essentially what that means is that we are purposefully blind to biases like tone of voice, accent, things like that. So all the AI in our case, what we are doing is we're actually only analyzing what the candidate says rather than how they say it. I do agree. I think we have seen instances with clients telling us where there have been a few opt-outs from that particular interviewing mode, where if I'm applying for a call center role, why is it important to do a video call, for example? So, and then all of a sudden everyone goes, actually, that's a great point. We've never thought about that. But somebody hasn't questioned that along the way. So having a solution also in terms of bias and AI, the one important thing you need to be aware of is use tools that still support the human to make the decision rather than come up with the decision itself. So in our perspective, our stance is really clear. Curiously, we're a decision-making and a support framework where we still believe the human and the human resource piece is really, really important. So the AI do the heavy lifting, let the humans still make the decision based on the data they see. So I think that's the important piece over here when it comes to the bias.
Great. So we have another question. With so many candidates currently looking for jobs, we're finding ourselves quite overwhelmed with applications. What automation tools would you recommend in filtering out people or even getting back to them when there are just so many?
If you'd like me to answer the question, the answer is curious thing. But I think more importantly, anything that helps you get through the repeatable stuff. And I'll give you an example. A while back, interviewing that we were doing where the AI is asking the question, the candidate is answering that, and all this done over the phone. All that was more around the behavioral attributes. There were things like, evaluating somebody's growth mindset or really understanding what sort of problem solver are they. How are their humility? What's their humility score in terms of understanding what that is? But what we did was, because the world went remote, we also started adding some eligibility questions. Example, do you have a driver's license? Can you work shift? Are you remotely set up to work well from your home and office? And in other countries where we do some of these interviews, that is actually a valid question going, do you have reliable internet connection to work from home? So they understand what sort of support is required. So there are lots of tools out there. I think there are some really pre-engagement tools that might be sitting there as well. But HR tech and talent acquisition tech is a huge space. And I think anything that helps you interview everybody is a really, really successful tool, rather than if it's still helping you make a decision of, I want to put 400 people through a particular tool and then I don't want to talk to the others. I think you should probably look at something that lets you interview everybody.
Absolutely. And I'll just add to that, there's a lot of applicant tracking systems out there for small to medium businesses that are really affordable. One of our partners is also JobAdder, and they really help to automate things where you can send mass emails out to applicants that might not be a fit, and then also auto scheduling in terms of scheduling and meeting up with hiring managers' calendars, for example, and really making sure that you are able to automate. If we are, a lot of people are going through difficult times at the moment and are unable to invest in new technology, there are tools out there such as Mixmatch as well, which again will help you to automate emails to make sure you are getting back to each and every applicant to let them know whether or not they are going to move forward in the process. And we have a question from Nick Lewis, which is, tell us more about Curious Thing, AI advantages.
Totally blind. So there's a huge list over here, Nick, and more than happy to foster the discussion outside of this as well. But the quick ones are interview everyone who applies for a job. So to give you an example, we had a client who did 1,000 interviews over 3 days. That included a weekend. So for a talent team to log in on a Tuesday morning and look at their results and go, I can easily look at the results and create some shortlist that helps me get closer to who do I really want to spend time interviewing. I think that's important. One of the core benefits that we also have, like I previously mentioned, is we're completely blind to unconscious biases like tone of voice, accent, time of day the interview is done. And because we're an on-demand service where the candidate dials in whenever they want. So if your peak interview performance time is 4 a.m., go crazy. Go into the invitation, dial the number, dial your PIN, and conduct the particular interview. Because what will happen from there is very quickly, there is a whole automation loop that sits in the end, which addresses that initial candidate engagement piece, where a candidate hears back from an organization quickly, does the interview, and also knows what the next steps are. So I think to do that really seamlessly and quickly is a huge benefit. So hopefully that kind of portrays some of the strengths that we have.
Wow, 1,000 applicants interviewed over 3 days. That's incredible. So we have a question from David. Do you normally insist on a cover letter plus CV when advertising a job? If you do you ignore those applications without a cover letter? From my perspective, we do ask for a cover letter. However, I never ignore an application, or my team never ignores an application without a cover letter. Some people might be furiously applying for lots and lots of jobs. They also might be employed and not have the time to do a cover letter. However, a cover letter does speak volumes for someone doing research into the company. Again, a lot of platforms out there or ATSs allow you to throw a question in as part of the application process. And that question can easily be, what made you apply for this job? And that really replaces a cover letter in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. If I may just add, I think we have seen a shift in the process a bit from our end, where I think there's a whole acquisition campaign that goes out when a job is put out. So be it LinkedIn, Seek, whatever the vehicle is, and then the applications are requested. We have actually had a particular client use an acquisition campaign just to create a landing page that goes first name, last name, email, and expression of interest in working with us. Because in embedding Curious Thing as the next stage of that particular interviewing process, what they've done is it goes straight into a behavioral interview, which does ask questions like, why did you apply for this particular job? Example, what was the last skill you kind of, or sometimes some time you invested in learning a new skill. What was it? Why did you do it? So giving you an opportunity to actually understand who is it that you really want to apply for that particular role, as opposed to getting every single person who sees the ad just send in the standard, resume with the covering letter. But it's a great point you make. I think it's going beyond that. I think the problem still remains. You might get all those applications through, but once again, somebody has to go through it and somebody has to validate the information that sits there. And the only way you can do that is if you go beyond the resume.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. We have a question from Nick here. How are you continuing workplace culture and satisfaction remotely? Did you want to take this one first?
Sorry, can you repeat that question again?
Yeah, how are you continuing workplace culture and satisfaction while everyone is working remotely?
I can only speak for Curious Thing. We do some crazy things. Example, I was earlier saying to Alex, the engagement piece that we do through our team meetings that we have is not just about business, but it's business plus fun. And I think the example that Alex, you gave earlier as well around, was it the Amazing Race stuff?
Trivia, yep.
I think that is brilliant. We have resorted to doing Zoom Taekwondo lessons, for example, as an organization, where 14 of us have logged in with a Taekwondo instructor and actually done that. And yes, you do break a sweat, but then you can very quickly even turn the camera off and check your emails.
Thank you. So I'll start with the fun stuff. We did virtual trivia last Friday in place of our all hands to provide the team with a celebration, and that was a lot of fun. On Thursday nights, we hold a happy hour. It's completely voluntary, and we generally have an employee put their hand up to lead that, whether it's something like Scribbler, which is online Pictionary. It could be a trivia event. It could be teaching someone how to make homemade pasta. It could be a dance session. Whatever people want to make it, they will make it, and it generally ends up being some social chit chat, which is great. Something that we've found really helpful at Employment Culture when we first pivoted to working from home, and we've continued it, and that is a really stringent, I guess you'd call it a cadence. And we don't want to be too kind of mandatory. However, we did put in place team stand-ups at least every Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. And that just gives the team a really good start to the day. And then after each team has their stand-up, our leadership team has their stand-up. So if there are any issues, we're across them and we're taking care of them and making sure that we're solving them. And it's just a really nice way to start the day. Also, giving your employees the permission to really take advantage of working remotely so that they are understanding that they're trusted. So if they want to take time out in the afternoon to attend their daughter's soccer game, for example, or if their passion happens to be yoga and they want to go and attend a yoga session, allowing them that freedom to do it, provided you're not in lockdown, or they can do an online class and then log back on and do their work when they need to, has been really important in just showing trust to people. And along with that cadence, we've upped our all hands to every week instead of every fortnight. And that's giving a business update or a team potentially giving an update on what they might be working on, just so that everyone is across what the business is doing and across what teams are doing. And also encouraging people to have, back to your point, virtual coffee, virtual lunch, get out at lunchtime and get some vitamin D and some exercise. I'm certainly guilty of getting to when the sun's gone down and I haven't kind of moved aside from racing to the bathroom and grabbing a sandwich. And that's something that I noticed really impact myself physically and mentally. And you really have to try and put those and encourage your employees to put that, you know, get up and stretch and get out in your calendar to make sure that you're encouraging and trusting your employees to take care of themselves and know that their managers know that their work is getting done. Another question from someone anonymous, what have we done to make virtual onboarding easier? So I'd say onboarding, since we've gone virtual, has actually taken double the time to do. And that's because there's now a lot more investment in terms of what you're doing. So starting off with a really fun welcome box that our remote employees get, which doesn't just have your laptop in it. It has a really nice welcome letter and a card from the hiring manager. We've thrown in some fun things like toilet paper and a bottle of Corona or cider for their first happy hour, some snacks, branded t-shirt, any branded swag goes a long way. Even if you take a notebook, as our fabulous head of Vibe has, and put a company sticker on it, it's just something that's branded and makes people feel really, really welcome. And then making sure you're setting up those team check-ins so that people don't just get an HR and company overview, they're actually getting the chance to get to know your product or whatever it is you're selling, widgets, whatever it might be, that they're getting a deep understanding of that and how teams work. So even inviting them to other team meetings and putting that in their schedule and giving them the permission to have one-on-ones with whoever they want to in the company or whoever they might need to, and making sure your hiring managers check in with your new employees at the end of that first week or the end, or, you know, kind of halfway through the week to see how they're going and make sure they understand that they know who to reach out to, and try to buddy new employees up with someone who might be a subject matter expert in the area that they're moving into. I don't know if you have any other tips in terms of virtual onboarding.
I think surprise someone with a Uber Eats morning tea or lunch or dinner.
Great idea.
Something like that. You know, something that is completely non-work related, but also shows that, well, if you genuinely mean that gesture, then brilliant.
Great. And Jenny, you've got a great question. Is there any research available that compares remote working to office working? I'm wondering what the evidence is to support permanent conversion to remote working. So Jenny, speaking personally, we did our own survey of Employment Hero a couple of months after we were remote working, and our CEO asked the question, if you had to go into the office, how often would you go in? And a whopping 92% of our employees said that they would only go in for brainstorming or offsites or to socially connect with others. They were just, you know, we had so many introverts that were loving working from home and loving the flexibility to either get up early if they're a morning person, to get out and do things with their kids like school drop off. They might have been in lockdown or might still be in lockdown. So we actually took, before a lot of the large companies did, we decided to go remote first. And we're now a remote first company where you choose when you work and when you come into one of our hubs. And one of the great things that's actually done is it's opened up our talent pool. So we had some really hard to hire roles, and we now have people from the Central Coast, from Queensland. We have a payroll trainer who is in Hope Island, for example. We've had people who are selling their Sydney apartments and moving closer to their parents towards maybe it might be south or to the Central Coast, where they can afford a bigger home, and they know that they only need to come into the hub for a quarterly planning offsite. And then we'll also, once we can get back together, we plan on having an all company once a year, probably 2 to 3 day event. Not sure when that will be, probably mid next year, but that's to get everyone together again to socially connect. We have another question from Trudy, which I just lost off the screen. Here we are. This is all good for companies that work in an office environment, but what about industries that work on site? How do you handle onboarding in this situation? That's a great question, Trudy, and I don't have employees on site at Employment Hero, and Curious Thing doesn't either. However, I do know people in the industry who have people who are essential workers and have to be on site, example, factory workers, healthcare workers, etc. So to do their onboarding, they are in the office with those managers that can be at a social distance, and they're doing the onboarding that way. And then the sessions that they're doing with, it might be office people, let's say HR, they are doing those virtually through Zoom or through a Google Meets or through Microsoft Teams, and just figuring it out that way. It's really important though, if you do have essential workers and you have a workforce that might be split, so some people might be in the office and some people are working remotely, you want to make sure the people in the office understand that you've got people working remotely, not because they're special, because you're trying to protect the essential workers that have to be in the workplace. It's really important from a psychological perspective that they understand that you're doing that not to make it special, because sometimes they can perceive that people are just working from home in their pajamas and having fun, and it's not like that at all. In fact, I can't stand the term of how do we return to work, because we've all been working. No one stopped working. It's
Correct.
about returning to the office when we get to that stage. And we have another one here. How do you suggest you combat issues with people who aren't very tech savvy? I wouldn't want to rule out a hopeful candidate, because sometimes it's hard to make a good first impression if there are some difficulties. And that's a great question. I have experienced that myself with a candidate who got very, very flustered because they couldn't figure out how to unmute themselves. So it's just about making sure your hiring managers understand to have the patience. Anyone with the smarts can be taught how to use technology. So have the patience to talk the candidate through how to either unmute themselves, and if you can't troubleshoot, turn their laptop off and on and restart. If not, revert to a phone call. So make sure you've always got that phone number. I don't know, Ruben, if you have more advice on that.
No, I think just echo the last point, which is the phone number. So for us, our delivery mechanism is just a simple phone call. So interviews that happen within Australia, it's a 1-800 number the candidate dials. There's a PIN code and an email. They dial that and off they go. So keeping it really, really simple is easy. But I think just another tip I'd like to add is whoever's hosting that particular meeting always has controls on the guests who are there. And so I think just neutralizing that by going, hey, if you can't find the mute button or whatever, just put your hand up and let me know, I'll mute you, and then go from there. So I think just taking that pressure off is really important.
Fantastic. We have another question. How do you ensure your employee is working to capacity? So key is trusting your employees when it comes to remote work, and that's through using things like goals. At Employment Hero, we use OKRs, which are objectives and key results, and that's all about output and outcomes. So just make sure you're trusting your employees to deliver on what they need to deliver on, but also give them permission to put their hand up if they're struggling, and make sure you have a really good cadence when it comes to communication. So again, those team meetings in the morning where people are just chatting about what their priorities are in the day, it can last 5 minutes, it can last 30. And also a weekly one-on-one with your employees is really important, with a shared document so that you can capture the conversation, and also be using that for coaching. And make sure your employee owns that meeting, not the manager. So it's all about the employee. It's not about you as a manager saying, what have you done? What have you delivered? It's about your employees being able to say, I'm really proud that I've done this week. I'm having some barriers here. Alex, how can you help me bring those barriers down? Ruben, I'm not sure what advice you have.
I think I echo pretty much everything that you've said in terms of, I think those cadences are really important. And sometimes, in our world, we as a development team, majority of the team is development. We're in Sydney and Brisbane. Essentially, we have been even more productive because things like commute are out of the way. People don't have to, make sure they're in the office by whatever time they need to be there. Or they have to, like, I think previously we were talking about that flexibility piece. I just feel like going and picking up my daughter from school. So, just communicating and making sure that everyone's on the same page, I think is more important, because at this time, everyone is equally tolerant with anything that might be coming from individuals.
Fantastic, thank you. And another question, what practical tips would you provide to hiring managers to deliver a better candidate experience for the interview process? And how do you provide candidates with a better expectation of the company's culture and work environment remotely?
I think the first part to the candidate experience piece is you should, in this day and age, regardless of what technology you're using, you should be able to customize a lot of that to reflect the personal brand or the brand values that need to actually come out, not just from the Zoom background looks like it's got the company's logo and stuff on it. But I think small intricate details like the language in the questions, the way you're asking, the way the responses are being documented or captured or whatever that is, or any other email communications, text messages, all those things that might be going out. So I think doing those small things and paying attention to the smaller details is more important at this stage to create that candidate engagement at that first stage.
Absolutely, and I'd add to that around training your hiring managers up, and also yourself if you're recruiters or you're in people and culture, taking the time to introduce yourself and your role, and just giving the candidate the time to take a couple of deep breaths, because they're already nervous about whether the technology is going to work, and then all of a sudden, bam, the technology's worked and the interview's started. So you really want to give the candidate the time to take a breath, get them comfortable and get them to know you and your role and perhaps how you landed at the company. And a really great way to display your culture might be to talk about what you love about the company, why you joined the company, what surprised you about joining the company, or have you been there for 2 years, and what are some of the small surprises that you've seen, and how have you seen the culture evolve? A culture is never stagnant, so it can be really nice to talk about your values and your behaviours and how you've seen that evolve over time. In terms of remote and talking candidates through that, it's just to be super honest. If there is an expectation that someone is to be at their computer at 8:30 a.m. in the morning because they might be in a customer-facing support role, for example, or a call centre, you need to be really upfront about that during the interview process, in that, yes, we're working remotely. However, your role as a customer-facing support person means that you have to be ready to go at 8:30 a.m. So we were going to have our stand up at 8 a.m, but then give them absolute permission to sign off at 5 or 5:30 if that's what their role involves. We have another question around making sure that candidates' fears are alleviated and engaging with them if they're in fear mode. And again, I'd go back to absolutely, then they're nervous, and the most nervous thing that they are about is if that technology is going to work to get the interview going. So once you've got the interview going, there's that sense of relief, but you want them also to be comfortable, authentic, and themselves. So take that time as an interviewer to introduce yourself, why you joined the company and what you love about it, to kind of get them feeling, okay, I'm okay now, it's all okay, and then they're feeling a bit more relaxed. We've got another question around the legality of recording on Zoom. And so that simply requires you to start recording and make sure you have recorded permission. So it's, Ruben, we've got an interview. Are you okay with the fact that I'm recording? If they say yes, continue to record. If they say no, make sure you turn off the recording mechanism, and that you do let the candidate know that you have turned the recording off. Mm-hmm. Oh, this is a great question that I'll throw to you. How can we bring the human touch into remote hiring?
Human touch to remote hiring, great. So I'll talk to our process, which is around the screening, the screening interview that happens right at that initial stage. You've got the high volume of resumes come through. How can you humanly actually, still keep the candidate alive? In our process, what we do is we actually have an initial email that goes out from obviously the organization that invites people to do that particular behavioral interview. But we have actually gone and so there's a few things that happen while the candidate is actually doing the interview. There's a little test run that happens at the start. So it's not just a rude interruption in your day where the phone rings and it says, "Hi, it's Christine, I'm doing your interview." It's always driven by when the candidate is ready. So we give candidates the opportunity to run through the test run. Now, it's not just once. They might want to do that 5 times, and that's okay, before they actually press that one and then they're ready to do that particular interview. At the other end, rather than me tell you, how good this is, we have actually received feedback from candidates where they have gone, "I wasn't quite sure what to expect, but once I started getting questions from the AI and answering to the best of my ability, I actually found that quite pleasant." And pleasant was the word that was used. And I was like, well, great, because, it's a delivery mechanism that is really, really neutral. Like, I always get asked the question going, does the AI need to sound like a robot? Can we make it more human? And what we have seen through our studies is the response is quite the negative, where the human goes, "Hey, robot, don't try and be a human because I know you're a robot," as opposed to really understanding, if it's an automated voice that is coming through in that particular interview, then leave it automated and let people know that it is a robot, and don't pretend it to be something else. So I think creating that particular, give candidates the options, first of all, in terms of, when and where and how they can do this particular interview. But I think also follow that up quickly with the human touch once everything is completed as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And for us, it's been video interviewing to make sure you put a face to it. But back to Ruben's point, make sure you're following up with people, even if it is a brief phone call. If someone's taken the time to research your company, to jump on a video and interview with you, the very, very least you can do is give them some feedback as to why they weren't a fit. And it just might be that they were the runner-up. However, doing that feedback brings a human element to it, and it always makes sure that they walk away as a brand advocate as well. We have one last question from Kate. How can we demonstrate culture through virtual interviews, and what are some specific aspects candidates are looking for? So Kate, I think one of the things we take for granted when we do and I've just launched a poll there, when we do virtual interviews, is that we forget to display the fun, the celebration element of our workplaces and our teams, and also making sure you ask the candidate what they do outside of work. That's a really good display that you're interested in the person, not just what they're going to do in their job. So please make sure that you do ask that question. What are you interested in inside out of work? What do you love doing? And it might just be simply that they love spending time with their family. However, you're illustrating your real interest. And even during your intro, or you could rebut to that question, what you love yourself and what hobbies you have, as well as what you love about the company in terms of it being fun. So go back to when you were all working together, and how have you translated that fun into the remote workplace, and how do you celebrate? So when you're doing really well as a company, or when you meet milestones, how do you celebrate? Let people know that. Is it reward and recognition, and how are you doing that? It's a really, really great way to display it, as well as through those questions that are a little bit outside of the box. So if I end that poll, which is, did you find today's session valuable? Fortunately, 98% did, which is fantastic. So thank you everybody for joining. If you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to shoot us an email. I think, Julia, it's marketing@employmenthero.com. and we will be sure to get back to you. I've thoroughly enjoyed the session, Ruben, and Curious Thing just sounds absolutely incredible. I'll certainly be looking into it to myself. To be interviewing 1,000 applicants over 3 days and to have those results is just phenomenal. So thank you for joining us. I've learned a lot myself that I will take away for me and my team as well. So thank you.
No, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate that. Thanks a lot,
Great.
Alex. Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Have a fantastic Wednesday, and we will see you again soon.